Road, District 14, make sure we get that. 10 of HJR 4 is simple and embodies common sense. We would like Idahoans to be able to exercise their voice regarding marijuana, narcotics, and other psychoactive substances by asking them to vote on this question on November 2026 ballot. That's the crux of it. So what would the question be to the people? Shall Section 26, Article 3 of the Constitution of the State of Idaho be amended to provide that only, and that's the key word, only the Idaho legislature shall have power and authority to legalize the growing, producing, manufacturing, transporting, selling, delivering, dispensing, administering, prescribing, distributing, possessing, or using of marijuana, narcotics, or other psychoactive substances. So there's a lot of reasons to bring this bill. First, really our Constitution demands it. It states from the Constitution, the first concern of all good government is the virtue and sobriety of the people and the purity of the home. It goes on to give us a mandate. It says the legislature, us, we, should further all wise and well-directed efforts for the promotion of temperance and morality. Second, legalization and normalization of these drugs produces negative personal health consequences, including but not limited to impaired fetal and youth brain development, increases in addiction, psychosis, overdoses, hospitalizations, and drug treatment services. Here's a quote from February 4th of the Daily Mail article that said, quote, Canadian researchers found new cases of schizophrenia triggered by cannabis have tripled since the drug was legalized in 2015. And in 2023, there were 105,700 overdoses in the United States. Third, legalization and normalization of these drugs produces negative community health consequences, including but not limited to the presence of cartels, increased human trafficking, more impaired drivers and workers, and increased public consumption of drugs. On Monday, February 3rd, it was reported that the Mexican drug cartels plan attacks on Border Patrol agents with kamikaze drones and other explosives as they fight the U.S. crackdown on the border. In 2024 congressional hearing, former FBI Director Christopher Wray said, quote, the FBI alone seized enough fentanyl in the last 2 years to kill 270 million people. That's about 2/3 of the population of the United States taken by the FBI alone in the last 2 years. In Idaho, there have been nearly 500 deaths caused by fentanyl from 2022 to 2024 in just 2 years. Fourth, legalization and normalization of these drugs produces negative environmental health consequences, including but not limited to illegal black market grow sites, trespassing on public and private lands, contamination of the soil and water and air from chemicals used in the growing or manufacturing of marijuana, narcotics, and psychoactive drugs. LA Times, Los Angeles Times in 2022 actually mapped out all the illegal grow sites in California and found 25 million square feet of illicit greenhouses with capacity to grow 2.6 million pounds, not ounces, pounds of marijuana, the equivalent to the entire legal market. Another example, the chemicals used in the production of drugs like meth make meth labs extremely hazardous. Fifth, legalization, normalization of these drugs produces negative economic health consequences, including but not limited to increases in workplace injuries, an increased burden on law enforcement, more government bureaucracy, and potential government subsidies to protect the legal markets from the black market. 2 years ago, California appropriated their legislature $100 million to give to the legal marijuana dealers, distributors, because they couldn't compete with the illegals. And concern for drug-free workforce is why this has been endorsed by the Idaho Farm Bureau, the Associated General Contractors, the sheriffs, the police, the chiefs of police, fraternal order of police, and the prosecutors. There was a bill passed in Oregon that would decriminalize all of these drugs. That's the sixth reason. That brings the de facto legalization through decriminalization and causes the harm to the personal and public health, the environment, the community, and the economy. In Oregon, Measure 110, listen to the title, the Drug Decriminalization and Addiction Treatment Initiative, backed by George Soros, funded lobbying group, passed 58% to 41%. With all that out-of-state money that came in, hardly any in-state Oregon money. It was all out-of-state. On November 2020 ballot, that went into effect February 2021. By April 2024, the horrible experiment was over. Why? Portland Dispatch said it this way, quote, after seeing increasing overdose deaths, rampant homelessness, and open-air drug dens, state legislators stepped in. Now, the state legislators are not the ones that put it in there in the first place. It was through the initiative process. Finally, the state legislators had to step in and swiftly pass a bipartisan overhaul of Measure 110 in less than a month's time, reinstituting penalties for the possession of hard drugs. And it was passed by the Oregon House. Listen to this, 88% in the House, 72% in the Oregon Senate, voted to undo what the initiative had done 2 or 3 years previously. They realized it was a total disaster. Now, they undid it, but the negative effects that have been there didn't just immediately go away. Oregonians are living with that. Now, House Joint Resolution number 4. First, it seeks to harmonize the current treatment that we have with alcohol in the Constitution. That's the sole power of the legislature with alcohol. And this gives the sole power of the legislature to these drugs. So we seek to give our legislature the same power and authority relative to marijuana, narcotics, or other psychoactive substances. Needless to say, the drugs that we're dealing with today are not the Cheech and Chong stuff of my era back in the 70s and 80s. These are high-potency drugs. And in 1934, when the alcohol stuff was put in the Constitution, these kind of drugs were not an issue. These are the realities of today that we are living with, and we should bring Idaho's Constitution into the modern times by addressing the reality of drugs. Put it in there, just like we did alcohol. Second, HJR 4 proposes that only the legislature of the state of Idaho shall have this power and authority to legalize the marijuana, narcotics, or other psychoactive substances. By adding the word only, this will prevent initiatives from subverting the legislature's power and authority relative to legalization of these drugs. This is crucial because between 1996 and 2020, out-of-state drug interests have rolled over every neighboring state of Idaho. Every neighboring state of Idaho has passed some form of legalization of these drugs. 9 different instances have taken place there. And Canada, obviously, back in 2015 did the same thing, and we heard earlier about the negative consequences there. They spent over $100 million around our neighboring states trying to convince the people that legalization of medicinal and recreational marijuana was a good thing for their people. The state of Idaho's sovereignty should come first. In summary, HJR 4 embodies the spirit of the Idaho Constitution. We've been asked to do this. It acknowledges the countless reasons this body needs to respond to the grim realities of drugs, and it brings this issue directly to Idahoans. The representatives of the people, we, the legislature, will bring a vote to the people to hear their voices. This takes nothing away from the voice of the people. It actually empowers the people to make a positive statement. Nothing could be more representative of our republic. Let's give Idahoans a chance to make Idaho the first state to proactively deny out-of-state drug interests. Idaho's hardline stance on all marijuana, narcotics, and psychoactive drugs is a winning strategy. Let's make an even stronger statement with our support of HJR 4 and send a clear, loud message to out-of-state drug interests that Idaho is closed for business to those kinds of folks. Let us bring common sense to the drug issue. No society is made better with legalization of illicit drugs. I ask for your support and ask you to pass this out of the committee with a do-pass recommendation.
Senator Ruckty. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator Groh, so is it your position that if this constitutional amendment passes, that the people could not use the initiative or the referendum process to pass or repeal laws dealing with marijuana use in the state of Idaho?
Senator Groh. Mr. Chairman, this would make sure that the initiative process could not be used to legalize drugs. Senator Ruckey, follow up?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Senator Groh, have we carved out exceptions to the use of the people of the initiative process on any other issue in the state of Idaho?
Mr. Chairman, this is actually bringing the same kind of thing. We're putting this on the ballot. We're not taking it away. We're putting this on the ballot so that people can express what they want for the state of Idaho. Follow up?
Well, Mr. Chairman, that wasn't my question. Mr. Chairman and Senator Groh, have we, what you're saying is that marijuana use, manufacture, growing, producing, etc., would no longer be subject to the initiative process. The people could not use this initiative process to address marijuana issues. Have we done the same thing? In other words, carved out an area and said this cannot be addressed by the people through the initiative process? Any other area?
Senator Groh. Mr. Chairman, no, it's not been done in any other area. The reason we're doing it is the Constitution tells us to do it. We're bringing it to the people for their vote. This is only relative to initiative relative to drugs, and you said marijuana, but marijuana, narcotics, and all psychoactive substances.
Well, Mr. Chairman, just to follow up, Mr. Chairman, Senator Groh, that's not quite accurate, though, is it? Because the Constitution uses similar language regarding alcohol. Is it your position that the initiative process, that the people of Idaho could not use the initiative process to address issues related to alcohol?
Senator Groh. Mr. Chairman, I'm not here to talk about alcohol. I'm here to talk about the legalization of marijuana, narcotics, and other psychoactive substances.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, but I was just following the logical argument that Senator Groh brought, but I'll withhold other questions for now.
Senator Anthony.
Mr. Chairman, just to clarify, I believe that the piece of legislation before us is whether or not we will place on the ballot for the people to decide whether or not we wish to change the Constitution to restrict the ballot measures and the initiative process. That's the question. Am I misunderstanding that, Mr. Chairman?
No, but I do have a quick question, Senator Groh. Yes, Mr. Chairman. So every so often, FDA approves a drug, and there's drugs that are approved. So is this playing in that space? In other words, in the future, or the drugs that are approved now, does that have any impact on what might happen at the FDA level? Mr. Chairman, no, it does not. As you may or may not recall, every year the process is that we go through, as a legislature, the Board of Pharmacy brings to us the recommendations on any changes in drugs. They bring that forward to the legislature. This year, we passed it unanimously in the House and in the Senate to accept the recommendations of the Board of Pharmacy. And so they do that based on the information they get from the FDA, DEA, and others. I don't see any other questions. Are you going to yield some time to Senator Lakey? Yes, sir. Thank you. Welcome, Senator Lakey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senators, Todd Lakey, State Senator from District 23. I'll be brief but emphasize just a few points. Senators, it's been my pleasure, even this year, to argue that in Idaho we are different. We're different, and that is why so many people want to come and live and raise a family in Idaho. We've planted the flag that we're different. We resist the moral and societal decline that we've seen that has plagued our neighboring states. And I think that's in part because of the constitutional provisions that Senator Groh mentioned. Our Constitution calls for us to resist that type of moral decline and promote temperance and morality and virtue and sobriety.
Yeah, there's a moat full of alligators around
watched
the
the negative
state
effects of
boundaries
legalization
of Idaho,
of drugs and the softer
Mr.
stance
Lakey?
on drugs
Come on.
that have increased homelessness, decline in mental health and increase in property and violent crime in our neighboring states. And Mr. Chairman, I'll echo, it's not our intent to impact the FDA approved and prescribed drugs. Even fentanyl has medical benefits, and it's controlled. And with that control and proper testing, it's prescribed by a medical doctor in extremely small amounts because it's so lethal. But that's the appropriate way to handle that issue in a prescribable pill or liquid form.
Mr. Lakey is a lawyer.
From marijuana, if there are redeeming properties, and do that, put it in a prescribable pill or liquid form. Senators, marijuana is a gateway to other drugs, but it also has serious consequences of its own. The modern levels, as was described, are extremely high as far as THC, and it's linked to problems regarding cognitive function, from learning, memory, attention, processing speed, perceptual and motor function, and language. The evidence also links it to earlier onset psychosis and worsens those symptoms for those that already have that condition. It's also connected to schizophrenia, it's especially strong in our young men. And research has shown that it increases risk of depression. Legalization increases the number of users. And cannabis products are often sold and packaged in packaging that mimics food products that are appealing to our youth. Adolescents are exposed to cannabis marketing, and when they're exposed to that, they increase their chance of use. Senators, as a former juvenile prosecutor, I've seen that marijuana introduces our youth to the drug culture. I was involved in a sting operation where undercover officers went into high school, and they were part of a marijuana selling operation. And it was, I guess, sad to see how some of the youth embraced that as being cool, to be a drug dealer. And that was all part of the marijuana culture that introduced them into doing that. It increases that corresponding criminal activity. This resolution helps protect against the pro-marijuana industry that will bring in large amounts of money, hire paid signature gatherers, and engage in a pervasive pro-legalization advertising campaign to influence voters in Idaho. Those in the industry acknowledge that Idaho is a relatively cheap state to buy success in an initiative process. But we're a republic. We represent the people, the voice of the people in our districts. And the Constitution provides that the legislature has authority and control.
Well, you're really good at
over what
spinning
Senator
false
Ruckey
narratives,
mentioned,
aren't you,
alcohol.
sir?
I would argue that our constitutional provision rests that authority with the legislature and not in the initiative process. Senators, it makes sense that if we treat alcohol as being the legislature's purview, it makes even more sense that drugs be that purview under the legislature as well. I'd ask for your support of House Joint Resolution 4 and help preserve what makes Idaho different and what makes it a great place to live and raise a family.
You're different, sir.
I'd answer any questions, Mr. Chairman, if you have them.
Senator Ruckey. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator Lakey, I think you're tracking with what I was asking about. So under Article 3 of the Constitution, Section 26, that's where we're going to the recommendation or the proposal is to put this provision about marijuana. And my understanding is it would say that the people couldn't use the initiative process to speak on or address any marijuana issues. That's subparagraph 2. Subparagraph 1 uses very similar language related to alcohol. Very similar language. So if we're saying that the initiative process can't be used by the people to address marijuana issues, are we saying by implication that we interpret the languages of subparagraph 1 regarding alcohol to mean that the people could not, by initiative or even referendum, speak to the use of alcohol?
Senator Lakey.
Mr. Chairman and Senator Ruckey, will caveat, again, that's not what we have before us. We have Section 2 before us today. And attorneys can differ, but I read subsection 1 to say that the legislature has full power and authority to permit, control, and regulate or prohibit the manufacture, sale of alcohol, and that this comes in that same vein. The legislature has the sole purview over alcohol, and this essentially does the same thing. I would say it adds an additional word to make it stronger in the sense that it says only the legislature, but I read those two the same.
Okay, thank you.
Senator Adams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator Lakey, in your testimony, you referred to studies that showed different results on, I believe it was marijuana. And my question is, so marijuana is a Schedule I drug, which makes testing and research for it challenging. Where is that data from? And is that age specific, or what are the parameters around those studies?
Senator Lakey.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Adams, most of my references come from the National Institute of Drug Abuse, and the studies vary. Some were focused particularly on youth, and the impacts, as I mentioned, on the future impacts on youth that use marijuana, and particularly the young men.
Senator Shippey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator Lakey, just in the discussion here, looking at the language, just want to see if I'm understanding this right, where existing, it says that the legislature, under Section 26 there, the legislature of the state of Idaho shall have full power and authority to permit, control, regulate, or prohibit. The proposed language here under 2 is that the legislature of the state of Idaho shall have power and authority to legalize. And so it would stand to reason, and correct me if I'm wrong, that should the legislature in the future legalize marijuana growing, producing, selling, and so forth, that the people would still have the power to roll that back and criminalize it through the initiative process. Am I understanding that correctly?
Senator Lakey.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Shippey, it does apply to the legalization, so I think your read is correct. The people could also still, by initiative, I suppose, make it illegal. And the counter to that would be if, for some reason, I hope it's not ever in my time, that the legislature legalizes it, the initiative process could be used to counter that.
Don't see any other questions. We'll go to some testimony.
Thank you, Mr.
And
Chairman.
as we do, the reason for a little extra latitude on the questions is this is a constitutional amendment consideration on a very big issue, and I think it's appropriate that we consider what the possible consequences might be. We do have a lot signed up. I do have some time management issues because we go on the floor at 10, but we're going to do the very best we can. Fred Birnbaum will lead us off. And please introduce yourself for the record. Time's yours.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Fred Birnbaum with the Idaho Freedom Foundation. We stand in support of HJR 4.
Yeah.
I want to talk about
how's Charles
things
Koch,
briefly, the why,
Fred?
the what, and the how.
You know, you
I
got your
believe
check from
Senators Lakey and
the
Groh have spoken to the why
Alec
quite
from,
extensively.
Charles?
So I would just say that rarely in public policy do we get a chance to be proactive and learn from the experience of others. Often we learn from our own mistakes. And we've seen initiatives, and the drug culture in other states has actually diminished the quality of life. And so again, I won't spend too much time on the why. I do want to talk a bit about the what, because I think there have been some questions comparing this section to the existing section. And whether or not you believe that intoxicating liquors is completely descriptive, I think you would agree it doesn't say beer, wine, tequila. It's a high-level description. And notionally, that's why in this proposed constitutional amendment, it uses the words marijuana, narcotics, and other psychoactives, meaning that it provides enough guidance, because what this is a constitutional amendment that's going before the voters. So if you said something like Schedule 1, that's variable. 2, would a voter know what that really is? So this informs the voter. Okay, this is what is being restricted to the legislature. The how, and I think this is where perhaps some people got hung up. Yes, the language is slightly different because it's more specific.
Did you write it, Fred?
Back in the early 1930s,
Sounds like
we
you
just come
wrote
out
this.
of
Or
Prohibition.
was it Charles Koch, or did that come from
really wasn't
ALEC, American
it was
Legislative
concerned to
Exchange
give the
Council?
states the power. But here's what's important to
and you wrote
understand.
it?
The states have the power. Marijuana is illegal.
Charles Koch?
Right
wrote
now,
it?
we know that. What this is saying is that the initiative cannot make it legal. And only the legislature can do that. And the reason is, very frankly, so that we don't have initiatives, because initiatives are driven by big checks, marketing, and messaging.
Yeah.
So I see my time's expired. That went
come
quickly. Thank you, and I'll
$64
stand for any
million
questions.
comes from
I don't see any. Thank you,
about
Brett.
300
Robert
corporate
Gillis.
PACs and lobbies to fund 1,400 Republican candidates.
After
in
that,
Idaho.
Victor Miller, if you can be
Secretary
ready.
of State Sunshine
Welcome to
Report.
committee.
Morning, Mr. Chairman. Robert Gillis, Idaho Tough on Crime. I'm going to give you a personal spin related to this measure and why I'm supporting HJR 4. I worked 25 years in Los Angeles as a peace officer, and one of the things we ended up dealing with was an initiative that passed out of San Francisco, initially as a Proposition P, and then eventually as Proposition 215, and it passed in 1996. It started behind a AIDS patient that was seeking marijuana as a treatment for pain, and it blossomed into over 5 million Californians voting it in, which became the Compassionate Use Act of 1996. What we saw on the streets of LA afterwards was chaos. Within about a year and a half, working the gangs in South Central LA, every gang was actively selling the drugs. They were growing it.
South Central LA,
They
it's
had
Carson and
doctors on deck that
Inglewood.
were writing
And I know that area because
$50. They give them a
I
card
lived
for
there.
medicinal
I
use.
worked in, didn't live there, I
Suddenly,
worked there
migraines and glaucoma were the
in the
standard symptom on the streets that everybody
80s.
had a medical marijuana
It's
card.
very poor there.
These things
That's
start
lots.
like that.
And other places. And as
what
long as you
happened was
have
maybe
poverty,
where,
then drugs flourish.
Good intentions began with
And it's,
medicinal use.
primarily
it
black
always
in that
blossoms
area.
into something much more. And the gangs, the cartels, they exploit it. They will exploit it here. And I think this is an important step to make sure that that does not happen. It will happen if it's legalized here for even medicinal use. There's a reason why Hot Box Farms and some of these other dispensaries are advertising on State Street, on Cole over by Costco, up on I-84. It's not for medicinal use. It's for recreational use. They're trying to normalize it. They want people to see it every day. And when I went out to Ontario to ride around with the police out there,
youngsters
we went to all the
mainly
different
under
dispensaries.
30
I was
years
being
of
shown
age
around,
are
and pretty much
thrown
every
in
license
prison
plate I saw there was
every
Idaho.
year for
People are
marijuana
going out there, they're buying
use
their
or
dope, they're bringing
possession,
it back in already.
3 grams or
I
less.
doubt that every single one of those cars has a medicinal
And,
use for
and
it.
it's
And I stand
$300
for
the minimum
questions
fine
in
now.
support
They
of
passed
HJR 4.
the-
Senator Rupke.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Mr. Gillis. Can't the same thing be said about alcohol use in the state of Idaho? The same sorts of complaints you have about marijuana use and how it permeates society.
Mr. Gillis.
Mr. Chairman and Senator Ruckty, I mean, I agree. Alcohol is a scourge across our country. You know, we got DUI crashes that happen every day in our country. Alcohol is a problem, but alcohol isn't illegal. Marijuana is. If you look at our entire country and you look at Idaho, Idaho stands out on a map because of our stance on illegal substances. And that's what we want. As the senator testified to, that's why everybody's moving here. That's why I brought my family.
And that's
here.
why
I've been
we
here
have
for 5 years. I
more
don't want to see what
prisons,
happened where I came from to start
and
happening here. And it
women,
starts in these small increments that doesn't involve
incarceration
alcohol.
rate
It's illegal
in
substances.
Idaho is the highest in the nation.
Senator Ruckty.
They're
Thank you,
building
Mr.
another
Chairman,
women's prison.
Mr. Gillis. But for the same reasons that you'd want to make sure that marijuana stays illegal, would you want to illegalize the use of alcohol? And if not, why not?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Ruckty, it's apples and oranges, honestly, to talk about alcohol in the same context as marijuana or fentanyl or any of the other illegal substances that are already illegal. We can all agree what alcohol does to destroy homes, marriages, people driving. We have a couple representatives in our capital, one of which lost a daughter to a drunk driver. I've dealt with that personally. I know alcohol is a problem. However, alcohol is not illegal, and we're talking about illegal drugs. And marijuana is illegal, and we want to keep it that way.
And I agree that it's a little bit apples and oranges. We need to steer it back a little bit. Let's go with Victor Miller.
Thank you, sir.
I'm Victor Miller from Meridian. I'm representing myself. I ask for your support of HJR 4. Since 1934, the Idaho Constitution has given the legislature of the state of Idaho full power and authority relative to intoxicating liquors for beverage purposes. HJR 4 brings the Idaho Constitution up to current realities by giving only the legislature power and authority for marijuana, narcotics, and psychoactive substances as well, and this is logical for 2 reasons. First, marijuana, narcotics, and psychoactive substances deserve the legislature's attention. Results of a JAMA Network Open study published in January 2025 that included more than 500,000 people in Ontario, Canada, over a 15-year period concluded, quote, problematic cannabis use was linked to 10 times risk of suicide death, 5 times risk of overdose, 4 times risk of lung cancer, and of course, 105,700 people overdosed in the United States in 2023. Second, it would end the unceasing attempts by out-of-state drug interests to bring initiatives to Idaho. You may hear testimony that there is no outside money coming into Idaho for pot, but Idaho should not take that risk or believe it. Why? Because from 1996 to 2020, pro-marijuana efforts in 9 surrounding states have spent nearly $100 million to legalize medicinal and recreational marijuana. Kind Idaho filed an initiative in September 2024, which would change Idaho code and legalize recreational pot, essentially. The initiative says, quote, the possession, production, or cultivation of marijuana or marijuana-infused products are exempted from penalties imposed by this chapter if marijuana is used for personal use, not for sale or resale, is not consumed in any public or open public setting, and is in the possession of a person who is at least 21 years old. Idaho does not have enough resources to enforce this, and this initiative is already antithetical to House Bill 7, which requires a minimum fine for possession under 3 ounces. So let Idaho once again lead by passing HJR 4.
Senator Adams.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Miller, welcome.
Senator?
The study that you pointed out from Canada,
Yes.
and you mentioned overdoses, was that related to marijuana?
Mr. Miller.
Senator, Chairman, Senator Adams, the JAMA Network study was specifically a marijuana-based study. So those are 2 separate. The CDC gave us the numbers of 105,700 overdose deaths from all drugs. And then the other study was specifically to marijuana, that it was 10 times the risk of suicide death, 5 times the risk of overdose, and 4 times the risk of lung cancer. So those are 2 separate studies.
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Adams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Miller, so did it specify if any of those overdose from marijuana were overdose deaths, or were they just overdoses where they took too much?
Mr. Miller.
Chairman Guthrie, Senator Adams, the 105,700 overdoses, I don't know the breakdown between fentanyl and heroin and cocaine and marijuana, and I'm sorry, I don't have those statistics, but I could try to get them to you. It's in the CDC. It's from the CDC in 2023.
Senator Adams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Miller, I was talking about the Canadian study that you said was specifically to marijuana.
Mr. Miller.
Chairman Guthrie, Senator Adams, the study found causality between a linked risk of suicide death, not overdose, but rather to suicides.
I don't see any other questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Billy Norr. Welcome to committee. Introduce yourself and who you represent.
Chairman Guthrie, members of the committee. My name is Billy Norp. I am from Meridian, Idaho, District 20. I am testifying for myself in favor of HJR 4. I hope you'll vote for it. This bill is not about new restrictions on marijuana, narcotics, and other psychoactive substances. The Constitution already requires that only the legislature can change laws associated with alcohol. This bill puts marijuana, narcotics, and psychoactive substances on par with alcoholic drinks, making it so only the legislature can change their laws also. You have only to look across our western border, has been mentioned by several people, to look at why we do not want to legalize those drugs mentioned above. Crime is up, homelessness is up, overdose deaths jumped by 43%. The enforcement costs have risen dramatically. Nothing good comes from legalization of those drugs. This bill will also make it more difficult for marijuana money to unduly influence our Idaho values. Y'all have only to look at the last primary election. Millions of dollars were spent from pro-marijuana groups trying to unseat our legislators that are anti-marijuana. I personally spent hundreds of hours campaigning for several of our anti-marijuana legislators to try to stem the tide of all the lies and half-truths that come from in the form of thousands of mailers full of lies and some paid people to walk the streets. Thankfully, most of our legislators survived, but not all did. This bill would make it nearly impossible to legalize those drugs, and thus most of that marijuana money would go elsewhere to a softer target in another state. HJR 4 will make it so that we can move on to discussing how to solve real Idaho problems instead of spending our time fighting an evil from without. Please give me and the other Idahoans the opportunity to vote on this proposed amendment. Thank you for your service as legislators. I know it is a sacrifice. I work with Senator Grow. It is a sacrifice. He spends thousands of hours, and I'm sure you do too. So anyway, thank you again for your service. Please vote for HJR 4.
Don't see any questions. Thank you. Joseph Evans. Welcome to the committee. Introduce yourself and who you represent.
Thank you, Chairman Guthrie, members of the committee. My name is Joseph Evans. I am here representing Kind Idaho today, as Mr. Miller kindly mentioned. And he's already read our initiative process, or our initiative, which I think is a key feature of what it is we're looking at. Now, I do thank Senator Grow for his citing of the incidences that are happening across the nation with regards to drugs in the United States. These are all things that are happening under prohibition right now. These are things that are happening with legal drugs that we are able to use. Scotch and Klonopin are a really bad mix, especially for individuals with PTSD, TBI, certain other things. What we're offering here is a natural remedy and creating the opportunity for people to continue to seek help where the current legalized system provided by Bayer, Pfizer, and several other drug companies continues to promote suicide among veterans at the rate of 22 a day. Thank you, because that's really what our options are without some of these good benefits that are made available through not just marijuana, but through psilocybin, MDMT, ayahuasca, and several other of these psychoactive drugs that we are developing a greater body of research almost daily. Thanks to people like Donald Trump, who has suggested the decriminalization of marijuana in Florida, the continuing citing of talk show hosts like Joe Rogan, who cites the use in moderation, in temperance, for the good healing of the people who are able to use it. That's something this body can do at any time. What we ask is that HJR 4 not go to the vote because we do not want the majority to prevent the rights of the minority to petition for the right to life, liberty, and health. Thank you.
Thank you for being in committee. Appreciate it. Alex Joy Greiner? Greiner?
My whole life.
Sorry about that.
Right. Not a
Correct me, introduce yourself, who you represent.
Yes, sir.
Welcome.
My name is Alex Joy Grenier, Star, Idaho. I'm representing myself. Some of you have heard my 6 miles speech already. Here's the brief version. Ontario, Oregon had 105 violent crimes and 702 property crimes for a total of 807 crimes last year. Viet, Idaho, with a similar population, is only 6 miles away. Viet had 22 violent crimes and 74 property crimes for a total of 96 crimes last year. Ontario's annual number of crimes is 800% higher than Viet, Idaho. They are only 6 miles apart. Why is HJR 4 important to pass? Because pro-drug leftists and libertarians will someday attempt to use the ballot initiative mechanism to push forms of drug legalization in Idaho. We can't let that happen. Idaho stands alone as the only state which restricts cannabis possession in the nation. According to U.S. News and World Report's 2024 Best States rankings, Idaho was the 3rd safest state for crime and corrections. Idaho has one of the lowest property crime rates, one of the lowest violent crime rates and one of the lowest homicide rates in the nation. This is no accident. Idaho is safe because of the good people living here and because we elect good leaders like you to make good decisions. $100 million has been spent by pro-drug lobbies in 9 surrounding states in efforts to legalize marijuana. Their goal is to make Idaho like Ontario, Oregon. HJR 4 will stop out-of-state money from bypassing our legislative processes to get their way with drug legalization. High crime in Idaho is only one bad ballot initiative and 6 miles away. I'm asking you for a do-pass recommendation on HJR 4.
Thank you. Don't see any questions. Teresa Halderson. I may not get to everyone on the list. The rest are all in favor. So just to give you a little.
Well, I am too. I am Teresa Halderson, District 22 in Meridian, Idaho. And I'm asking you, I am totally in favor of HJR 4. And I've kind of listened to all the testimony so far, and it seems to be there's a little concern about the alcohol versus marijuana. And so I'm going to speak a little bit about that. The pharmacodynamics of marijuana is an ingested product via orally. You eat it or you smoke it. Both of those methods increase the absorption and the THC effect of marijuana is almost immediate to the cognitive effects of this drug on your brain, and particularly in our younger adults, because their brains are less developed, they're less able to resist the advance and the progression of this marijuana. Does that answer your question? Okay, good. I also want to add that marijuana is not the marijuana of Cheech and Chong. That is absolutely true. Back in the 70s, the THC was 1.5% per joint. Jump forward to 2018, it is now 21%. So your THC is 21% of the joint that you inhale. That's a significant increase. In addition to that, there's already 100 chemical structures within a joint of marijuana. And I think that's all I have to say about it. I ask you to vote yes and move this along. I think it's broad enough to protect the future dynamical change, because I want to promote this selling of these types of drugs, and they're only going to get stronger and more potent, and I think it puts our future generations in an increased risk.
Senator Adams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm sorry, I didn't catch your name.
Teresa Halderson.
Ms. Halderson, thank you. So, you talked about percentages of THC levels, and back in the 70s it being 1.7%. Is that what I heard?
Chairman, that was 1.5.
Keep in mind, Nevada,
what was the other
Utah,
98.5%
Montana,
of the joint made up of?
Washington, Oregon.
Thank you,
they've
Chairman.
all taken
there are
marijuana
over 100
and
chemicals
decriminalized it.
In cannabis.
And
so I don't know what the other part, but I do know
I don't
that there's
use
some
it. We've had it
significant,
in our
there's
family.
herbicides,
But
there's
to
synthetic
do this?
materials.
I mean, this is incredible.
I
They want
honestly
to put it
don't
in the
know
state
if they can break it
constitution
down
forever.
pharmacologically under a microscope to figure out everything that's in there specifically.
You know, this is nonsense.
Thank you. So if there's a bunch, if the joints, as you call them, from the 70s,
marijuana
were
was
1.5%.
Put a Schedule 1 because of the Vietnam War. 1 out of 5 GIs that came back, and I served in the Air Force
more harmful
in World
than today's marijuana.
in the Vietnam
Chairman, thank you.
War.
This document, this research
Chinese
just demonstrates
and
that the THC levels
Viet Cong,
are much higher.
The North Vietnamese made sure that all the GIs had plenty of marijuana.
That's the THC is the chemical that causes that
and
hallucinogenic
then 1 out of
effect.
5 came back.
Thank you.
And
Max Brown.
President Nixon, made sure, he says, well, gee, if we make it Schedule 1, they won't be able to vote.
And Senators, I'm grateful for this conversation. I know that we've talked a lot about the whys. I am also in favor, so I won't belabor it, but I would like to introduce my little brother if there's an opportunity. He signed up via Zoom. He's a court drug counselor now in Idaho Falls, but a former addict. My folks fostered a lot of children and adopted a lot of children in our family. So even here in Idaho, we have experienced a lot of that in our own home. And so I'm personalizing that experience today, having having visited my own brother behind bars. And so today he's changed and his life has changed. But even since he testified last week on the House side, he's actually lost another good friend this week to drug overdose in Idaho Falls. He's actually, what he'll share with you is quite compelling and incredible. But I would just finish with a couple stories also of other folks who have actually moved to Idaho recently because of the drugs where they lived. We have a farmer who sold his 1,000-acre ranch in California because cartels trespassed on his property and started growing there without abandon. And drilling wells, illegal wells on his property and leaving devastation in its wake. He sold his property and moved to Idaho because he was looking for something better. I've spoken to an Oregon mayor on the border who says they spend so much more on law enforcement and the problems now that they deal with there with the crime and the homelessness and the challenges that we've all heard about already. And finally, I've also spoken to a mother in Colorado whose son committed suicide because of the psychosis that he experienced. So I share those personal experiences, not because it's hyperbole, but because it's real and it's happening here in Idaho as well. So I appreciate your time and consideration on this HJR 4.
And I think we're going to Little Brother next. So
thank you.
Thank you for being in committee.
Thank you.
We will try Kyle Brown.
Good morning.
Good morning. We can hear you. We can't see you.
Oh, there we go.
There you go. Thank you.
Good morning, Chairman and Committee. My name is Kyle Brown, and I will be representing myself. I'm testifying for HJR 4. I'm a United States Navy veteran. I grew up in rural Idaho, in Ryrie, Idaho, actually. I've lived in Idaho most of my life, and I absolutely love our state just as much as I love our country. I feel like I'm an absolute veteran and, patriot to this country, in my heart. And I want the best for it. When I was younger, I experimented with a lot of different substances. It started out with alcohol and also THC, and I didn't think it was too big of a deal, just hanging out with friends, using those substances. And throughout my life, I have been a daily drug abuser and user of many different substances. I've used every substance. In my late 20s, after the military, I fell into full-blown meth addiction. I was an IV meth user, and I absolutely couldn't function without it. I was lost. I didn't know which direction I was going, and luckily, Idaho laws actually saved my life. I was arrested for possession of methamphetamines and taken into jail where I couldn't use, and that actually helped me to get clean. I was able today, after a lot of hard work and with the help of Veterans Treatment Court and our local recovery community here in Idaho Falls, I've managed to rebuild my life. I've been clean since 2019. I'm currently a recovery coach and peer support specialist at the Center for Hope, and I also work for the Bonneville County drug treatment courts in Idaho Falls, the same treatment courts I was a part of. So I get to help people also find sobriety, and it's pretty amazing. I feel like Idaho is a state that's built on strong communities, family values, and a commitment to a safe and healthy future. Illegal drugs threaten everything we stand for. They bring crime, addiction, and devastation to our neighborhoods, tearing apart families and endangering our children. By keeping illegal drugs out of Idaho, we protect our loved ones, support law enforcement, and strengthen our economy. Let's stand together, uphold our values, and ensure Idaho remains a place where hard work, responsibility, and opportunity thrive, free from the destruction of illegal drugs. Thank you for your time, and I'll take any questions if you have them.
Don't say any, but Mr. Brown, I want to thank you for your service. I want to thank you for having the courage to share some personal experiences that I think are very important, and takes a lot of courage to do that, and also for working in your community to try to help others avoid some of the pitfalls you experience. So thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you for your time.
Edward Clark. Welcome to committee.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Edward Clark, and I serve as a policy assistant at Idaho Family Policy Center. We stand in support of House Joint Resolution 4, and we thank the sponsors for bringing it forward. As you know, the state of Idaho has a well-deserved reputation of being tough on drug and substance abuse. Such a stance is vital at a time when marijuana abuse is commonplace and fentanyl is constantly threatening the health and well-being of our communities. The legalization and decriminalization of addictive, mind-altering substances has been linked to a variety of societal issues, including homelessness, recklessness, and a general decline in public morality. Our neighboring state to the west is a perfect case study in this. In 2020, Oregon decriminalized possession of illicit drugs, opting for programs that relied on voluntary enrollment in rehabilitation programs rather than strict enforcement of mandatory minimum penalties. The results were catastrophic. In the 3 years following the decriminalization of harmful substances, over 7,000 drug possessors were encouraged to seek rehabilitation help. Only 200 actually sought out help. In 1 year alone, Multnomah County saw a 40% increase in opioid overdose deaths. Substance abuse continues to run rampant in Oregon, even after those measures have been peeled back. Idaho must not follow the same path. The Idaho legislature has a constitutional mandate to promote morality and temperance across our state. This proposed measure ensures that the Idaho state legislature maintains the right and responsibilities to protect towns and cities across our state from being overrun by the societal disease of substance abuse. And so I ask you to send House Joint Resolution 4 to the floor with a do-pass recommendation. Thank you, and I'm open to any questions from the committee.
Thank you, and I don't see any. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
That's all we have on the list. So Senator Groh or Senator Lakey, if you could briefly offer some closing remarks, appreciate that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the opportunity, and I will be brief. We've heard about the fact that people can go over to Oregon, they can get marijuana if they need it or whatever. This is directed at the cartels. This HJR4 is directed at the cartels, the drug lords, the big business drug promoters, the out-of-state money that's coming in and trying to sweep over us, change our whole climate and atmosphere in Idaho from being a drug-free standing state to a state that accommodates and normalizes drugs. And once you do that, things are in chaos, devastation increases. You've heard all about that. I will mention, relative to marijuana, that we as legislators have approved 4 different marijuana drugs by prescription. We're not anti-prescription. We favor any legalization that helps people. And we as a legislature have approved 4 different marijuana drugs, which are available by prescription here in Idaho. With those comments, I encourage you to vote for HJR 4, send it to the floor with a do-pass recommendation. This will be good for Idaho, give the Idahoans a chance to make a positive statement instead of being on defense all the time, trying to keep things out. Let's make a positive statement and tell them we don't want this stuff in. Idaho's closed to drugs. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Lakey, are you good? Committee HJR 4 is before us. Senator Denton Hartog.
Mr. Chairman, I move we send HJR 4 to the floor with a do-pass recommendation.
Second. Motion by Senator Denton Hartog, second by Senator Harris. I believe that HJR 4 be sent to the floor with a do-pass recommendation. Discussion on that motion. Senator Adams.
Mr. Chairman. This topic is kind of interesting to me specifically. We talk about drugs and we think of marijuana, we think of LSD or cocaine or fentanyl, and nobody really talks about the pharmaceutical drug industry, which is completely legalized and has caused more overdoses than any illicit drug that exists. I want to speak real quickly about the gateway drug discussion. I've heard for a long time that marijuana is a gateway drug, but I would just point out that gateway drug is defined as a habit-forming drug that may lead to the use of other addictive drugs, cigarettes, alcohol, which are legalized and widely used not only in the United States but all across the world, would categorize as a gateway drug. in the 2023 NDAA, Representative Dan Crenshaw, a Republican from Texas and former Navy SEAL, he added some psychedelic treatments for testing for military veterans suffering from PTSD, TBI, and other things, including MDMA and others. And then in 2024, the NDAA that Congress just passed had psychedelics that could be used for active military to treat TBI and PTSD. So I share a lot of the concerns about psychoactive drugs. I think they're a problem, and I think the legalization of those drugs broadly has had a very negative effect societally. But when it comes to this, we are not debating whether we should legalize marijuana or whether we should legalize any psychedelic drug. We are discussing a ballot question. And specifically this one addresses an issue in the ballot initiative process that I've had frustrations with for a long time. And that is the concept of direct democracy. So in this situation, we are carving out illicit drugs, psychedelic drugs, and saying that the legislature should be the ones who decide if something goes forward on this, and it shouldn't be hammered through by what James Madison in the Federalist 51 would have called tyranny by the majority. Ooh. So I don't support mob rule, and I think that's the biggest issue with our ballot initiative system right now, frankly, is the fact that the legislature does not address this on all issues. I think there should be a democratic Republican form of government process where every issue has a check and balance between tyranny by the majority, mob rule, as our founders called it, and a legislative function. And for that reason, I do support this going on the ballot, Mr. Chairman.
Don't see any other discussion. Again, the motion is by Senator Den Hartog, second by Senator Harris, that HJR 4 be sent to the floor with the recommendation to pass. I guess we do have one more point of discussion. Senator Rutley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm having a tough time really drawing the distinction between, for example, alcohol and marijuana use. I think the very arguments that we heard about marijuana use could be used about alcohol, and yet alcohol is legal, and I can't imagine trying to take away the right of the people to be able to use alcohol. I mean, certainly we have laws that punish its misuse. We provide for drug treatment related to that. I think the fact that it's legal makes it easier for us to do that. We tax it. We use that revenue to help better society. And so, if the legislature is going to say that through this initiative, it has control over the use of manufacturing, et cetera, of marijuana, I don't see how you can't logically conclude that the legislature thereby believes it could do the same thing for alcohol. And I just don't think that's what the people want. And they really don't need the legislature to babysit them on this. I mean, the people they're smart, they're intuitive, they figure this stuff out. They can decide whether marijuana needs to stay illegal or become legal. The arguments can be made. You can go to the people, and I mean, such overwhelming testimony here today, certainly that would convince anybody that is open to those arguments, and you should be able to make those arguments in the marketplace of ideas. But this is a very undemocratic concept, to just remove this particular issue from being able to be debated by the people in the marketplace of ideas. If you're that confident in your argument and the data that supports it, let's have the discussion. But a prohibition on what the people are smart or are thoughtful enough to understand, boy, that just rings hollow to me. So I'll be voting against this.
Again, the motion is to send HJR 4 to the. You guys are killing me, Senator Shippey.
I apologize, Mr. Chairman. In just a quick response to my good colleague here on my left, this isn't making the decision for the people of Idaho. This is simply putting this before the people of Idaho, whom we trust, to debate the issue and make a wise decision in 2026. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator, and that sums it up nicely. Okay, those in favor of sending HJR 4 to the floor with the due pass indicate by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Senator Ruckty will be recording as voting no. That motion carries.